What is up, everybody? This is your boy, Teran Rodriguez, bringing you another edition of Set Point. Like I said, we don't have any college volleyball to talk about or to preview, but what we do have to preview is the West Coast Conference releasing its volleyball schedules to its 18 teams, or 20 teams actually. But for the time being, it will be a conference-only schedule between the 20 teams that are in the conference, and it's sure to be a top-notch fight. Last year, San Diego won the West Coast Conference, and can they do it again? Or will BYU, Pepperdine, or Santa Clara knock them off? And also, I will be talking about the players that will be impacting the certain West Coast Conference teams, and also the players that departed from last year's West Coast Conference teams. And also, more importantly, I will give my final prediction and my thoughts on who will win the West Coast Conference. All that and more here on Set Point. This is Teran Rodriguez bringing you another edition of Set Point here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports. And welcome one, welcome all to another edition of Set Point. Thank you for tuning in to episode 63 of Set Point. It truly means a lot. I'm glad to be here on this beautiful Tuesday afternoon or Tuesday evening, depending on where you're listening from. And without any further delay, let's get on into some volleyball news. So, as you all know, the West Coast Conference has released its volleyball schedules. Yes, women's volleyball season is on the horizon to return. I can't believe it either. So yes, the West Coast Conference has released its schedule. Unfortunately, it is conference only for the time being. So we don't know about the non-conference games or if there will be non-conference games. I hope there will be because for BYU, I want to see the Holy War. And for University of San Diego, I want to see the San Diego Showdown. And then also LMU deserves some love because they're LMU. And Pepperdine might actually turn some heads as well. And then we can't sleep on Santa Clara as well. And then some other matchups deserve some non-conference games in the West Coast Conference. So yeah, that's pretty much that for the time being. But that's the West Coast Conference. I also did get word that it's looking like they might have the West Coast Conference might have non-conference games, but there's hardly any time for it. Like, that along with the WAC might have non-conference games. And why is that significant is because it all depends on which teams are located in which region. I think BYU could probably get away with having a non-conference game or two because I don't know how bad Utah is in terms of COVID-19, but I think it should be totally fine. Do I expect fans at some of these games? Not really. I don't. I highly doubt there will be fans or any other authorized personnel. So, thanks to NCAA volleyball scores, which is not officially tied to NCAA, or aka Ed Strong, he actually provided me some good insight on which conferences will be having non-conference games for the time being. So, for sure, yes, is Conference USA, the MVC, I think that's like Mountain Valley Conference, the Summit Conference, the ASUN Conference, the SLC, the Southern Conference, and the SWAC. And then the yes, but hardly have any time for it, conferences that will have non-conference games are the West Coast Conference and the Western Athletic Conference. And then the unclear conference clear category in terms of conferences will be the Sky Conference, the AE Conference, and the BSC, which I actually didn't get to look up some of these names. And then in terms of no non-conference games will be the MW Conference. I don't think that's Mountain West, but it wouldn't surprise me if there are no non-conference games in the Mountain West Conference. And then the OVC. So, again, I'll probably look up all these conferences by heart or after the show, but there are some conferences that will have non-conference games, which is awesome! And then there are some that says maybe, but we don't have time to schedule it right off the bat. And then there are some that are unclear, and then there's some that's like, no non-conference games. None, zero, zilch, nada, none. That's it. Anyway, so once again, big thank you to Ed Strong, aka at NCAA VB Scores. Really means a lot that you updated me on that, so really cool. And then I guess also noteworthy to mention that my first ever blog post on some of the NCAA women's volleyball conferences that partook in the NCAA fall volleyball season came out yesterday. So if you can, definitely do go on to iesportsradio.com, then look under blogs, and then you'll see my blog, my recent blog that just came out. And it was a pickle of a post. It was like more than 2,000 words. I definitely gotta give a shout to Mike Pat for editing and putting up with that, because as an editor, I know the pain. Well, technically I'm an assistant sports editor, but you know what I mean. So, alright, so now let's dive on into the West Coast Conference and let's educate you listeners on the West Coast Conference. So, class is in session, and Professor Rodriguez is about to give you a little history lesson on the West Coast Conference. Alright, so the West Coast Conference from last year. This is a pretty proud conference. It has some pretty talented teams such as San Diego, BYU. Those are the first two teams that are the two-headed monster of this conference. Then they have some other talented teams like Pepperdine, Santa Clara, Loyola Marymount. Pacific's kind of up there. St. Mary's is somewhat up there. Like, it's not a Power 5 conference, however. The West Coast Conference is not a Power 5 conference. That's why it doesn't get a whole lot of love, unlike the Pac-12, the SEC, the Big Ten, the Big 12, and the ACC. So that's kind of where the West Coast Conference kind of gets shafted a little. So it kind of sucks, but it is what it is. So last year, in terms of the NCAA tournament, only 2 West Coast Conference teams made the NCAA tournament. Those 2 teams were San Diego and BYU, who finished first and second, respectively, in the conference. I kind of found it a little hard to believe that only those 2 made it in, because there are actually some talented teams in that conference. I mean, you look at the third place team, that team was 14-4, 2 games behind the second place, and that team actually knocked off San Diego, which I'll be talking about which team as the show progresses. And did I say 20 teams were in this conference? I meant to say 10. 20 matches are going to be on every conference schedule. So every team gets 20 conference games, and yeah, I'll be talking about the conference format in a little bit. So anyway, back to last year's NCAA tournament. Only 2 teams from the West Coast Conference made the NCAA tournament. San Diego and BYU. And unfortunately for both teams, they both lost in the round of 32, which is really disappointing. San Diego lost to a talented Hawaii team, which, I mean, I can't really fault them for losing, but I thought they were better than that. I thought San Diego was actually going to beat Hawaii. Unfortunately, it was at Hawaii. That was the kind of the tough thing for San Diego. They had the rotten luck of winning the conference, but unfortunately being on the road and not hosting a regional portion of the NCAA tournament. They were basically in the Hawaii region. Like, San Diego won their first NCAA tournament game against Washington State. Good on them for beating a Pac-12 team. However, Hawaii was kind of a different story, as Hawaii kind of took them to the shed. But when you're playing at Hawaii, you really got to be on your A game, because Hawaii does not play games. They have very passionate and loyal fans, and they have a very storied women's volleyball team. And they have a pretty good men's volleyball team, too. So yeah, San Diego got booted out of the round of 32, which was disappointing. I actually picked San Diego to upset Hawaii because I thought they were so much better. I thought they had improved, but I guess not. So now let's go to the other team that made the NCAA tournament, and that was BYU. Okay, BYU I knew was a talented team. They didn't get any love because, first and foremost, they lost to San Diego twice. I don't remember the last time BYU lost to San Diego twice in the same season. I want to say that was like 2011, 2012, or 2012, 2013. Something like that. But BYU they had an up and down season. Like, their season was started off okay. Like, one loss they had, however, that was kind of unacceptable, was losing to number 16 Marquette in 4 sets. Then they lost to number 3 Texas in 4 sets. This was in non-conference play. And then they lost to San Diego twice because San Diego apparently had the key to beating BYU. I kind of don't understand, because BYU had so much senior talent, and yet they couldn't beat San Diego. Like, both matches went 5, and then, unfortunately for BYU, they lost both matches. Gosh dang it, BYU. However, BYU did win an NCAA tournament game. They beat New Mexico State in straight sets, which is no surprise. And then, unfortunately, BYU's NCAA tournament came to an end as they lost to, you guessed it, number 17 Utah. And unfortunately I think BYU was actually higher seeded, but according to their schedule, they were actually, Utah was the number 17 team. I'd have to go back and check the NCAA bracket, but I want to say, but if I remember correctly, I want to say that Utah eventually faced Stanford, but I thought that BYU was seeded higher. Like, I thought Utah was seeded higher. Either way, BYU got bounced in the second round, and I think that was actually an upset because BYU was so much better than Utah. Unfortunately, Utah was probably one of the most under-the-radar teams in the NCAA tournament, as Utah got no love in terms of seeding. Actually, they did get seeded. They were, like, I actually think that BYU was seeded higher. I don't have the NCAA tournament bracket in front of me, but I will say this. I think I'm almost certain BYU was seeded higher than Utah, which is disappointing for Utah, which is disappointing for BYU, because, again, BYU had so much senior talent, and then they unfortunately had the honor of getting booted out. They were actually on I think they were on the Stanford side of the bracket, so I don't know if BYU would have been able to beat Stanford. BYU actually beat Stanford last year, which is actually surprising. But unfortunately, BYU lost in the second round. So it was kind of a down year for the West Coast Conference. I guess it's also noteworthy to say that Santa Clara also made the postseason as well, but they did it in the NIVC, the National Invitational Volleyball Championship, which is basically like the NIT. And Santa Clara did win a game in that tournament. They beat... Unfortunately, Santa Clara beat Long Beach State, and I had to witness it. I'm kidding. I covered that game for the Daily 49er. But Santa Clara is really talented. I think Santa Clara could be one of the more under-the-radar teams in the West Coast Conference. One player that... Oh, well, actually, I'll talk a little bit later about Santa Clara as a whole. But I will say this about Santa Clara. They are a talented team. They have talent and they have height. Like, Long Beach State really needed to play some good volleyball, and they kind of didn't, which is disappointing. I get that it was Long Beach's first NCAA... It was their first postseason berth under Joy Mackenzie Furbringer, the head coach, but I also kind of wonder that I think that Santa Clara could have been beaten, but unfortunately they weren't because Santa Clara has so much talent and so much height on their team. Yeah, and Santa Clara eventually lost to, I forget the team that beat Santa Clara in the second round of the NIVC. I want to say it was Tulsa. I'm almost 95% certain Tulsa was the one that beat Santa Clara. I'm actually just going to pull this up on my handy-dandy iPhone and see, but I'm almost certain that that Tulsa was the one that defeated Santa Clara in the NIVC second round, and I guess I can't go back. I'm actually on their site as we speak, but just going to scroll down to history and records, and I can't find it. Oh, well. Okay, but either way, Santa Clara lost in the second round, which sucks because I thought they actually had a decent team to go deep into the NCAA tournament. But unfortunately, that wasn't the case because Santa Clara unfortunately lost to what is believed to be Tulsa. So, actually, wait a minute, everybody. I found it. Yes, Santa Clara did lose to Tulsa in the second round of the NIVC. I was correct. Yes, and they lost at Long Beach State. So, I'm surprised they actually lost that, considering, again, Santa Clara has height and talent. But unfortunately, I guess Tulsa had the luxury of being in the AAC, which I guess is better than the West Coast Conference. Yeah. But I will also say this. One team that I thought would have made the NCAA tournament, or that I thought was going to be playing in the NIVC, was Pepperdine. Again, I'll talk a little bit more about Pepperdine in a little bit, but I'm surprised they didn't want to partake in any postseason action. I'm also surprised they didn't make the NCAA tournament because they had such a talented team and they had shown a lot of promise and improvement. So I'm a little disappointed in that. So yeah. Okay, so anyway, so we're actually just moving on from the NCAA tournament side of things. We're actually just going to go back to the West Coast Conference standings from last year, and we're going to round up the 10 through 6. So, bringing up the rear from last year was Portland, who finished 3-15 in the conference and 11-18. Which, if you actually look at Portland's schedule, they were actually 5-7 or 5-3 in non-conference games, and then unfortunately conference play happened, and Portland went 3-15, and that led them to being 11-8, which is sad face. C'est la vie. Okay, so 9th place in the West Coast Conference was San Francisco. San Francisco was 4-14 in the conference and 8-21 overall. So San Francisco didn't look like a top-notch West Coast Conference team, but things happen. And then 8th place is, tied for 8th place is Pacific and Gonzaga, who both finished, tied for 7th and 8th is Pacific and Gonzaga. Both teams finished 5-13 in the conference, and then Gonzaga finished 11-19, while Pacific finished 13-7. Sorry. So here's the thing about Pacific. In non-conference games, Pacific went 8-4, which is quite impressive. And then conference play happened and they kind of got exposed. And then Gonzaga, on the other hand, went 6-6 in non-conference games. And then, again, conference play happened and then it just went all the way downhill for them, which is saddening, but it is what it is. So then rounding up the bottom 6 through 10 is St. Mary's, who finished 7-11 in conference play, and then they finished 11-17 in their overall record. And if you look at St. Mary's record, they were actually a whopping 4-6 in non-conference play, and then they wound up going 11-17 overall, and then 7-11 in conference play. Hopefully their coach took them out for slushies Slurpees after they went 7-11. Get it? 7-11? That's not really funny, but either way, that's pretty much the bottom 5 between 6 through 10. Now we're going to get into the top 5, but first, we're actually going to take ourselves a quick little break. When we come back, I will be breaking down the top 5 teams, the top 5 West Coast Conference teams from last year, and I will be breaking down if they will be able to win and which team will be able to win the West Coast Conference this year. And then I'll also be breaking down the rosters as well. So you're listening to Set Point here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports.
Hey guys, it's Blake Henley, better known as H-Town Blake to some of you. Happy to announce that Bases Loaded is back in full force. We'll be bringing that high heat every Tuesday night here on IE Sports Radio. So come home, get ready, dig into that batter's box, and see if you can chase that high heat, baby. So we'll be coming to you live with all the stats, all the rundowns, all the division rivalries, and every team that's going to make the playoff push to get to that one and only October and get to the pinnacle of what baseball is, to hoist that Commissioner's Trophy when it's all said and done.
What's good, fight fans? It's your boy, Marcus Los Great, here to give you what you want, here to give you what you need. Yeah, man. Yeah. I'm coming to you live, straight from your mama's basement with a crispy, awesome white tea. We are coming to you live every Tuesday at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Powered by IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports.
Hey sports fans, do you like wine? Well, we've got the show for you. This is Let's Wine About Sports, a show where we talk about wine and sports simultaneously. From the classic Cabernet Sauvignon all the way down to the grapes that you've never even heard of before. Oh yeah, we cover it all. And we'll talk about a little bit of sports as well. Football, hockey, collegiate, women's sports, it doesn't matter. We're going to talk about it all, and we're going to whine about it all. So join me Monday at 8 p.m. on IU Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports.
And we are back with segment 2 of Set Point. You can check out all those amazing shows here on IE Sports Radio. We have different platforms you can listen it to. You can listen on YouTube, you can listen to it on Spreaker, you can listen on TuneIn, you can listen to it on SoundCloud, you name it. We're also affiliated with StreamYard as well, so definitely tune into all of our amazing shows. The last drop you heard was by Mike Pat and his show, Let's Whine About Sports. Like I said, Mike Pat is a part of the blog site, and he's pretty much the editor. He helped edit my story, my most recent blog post about the NCAA women's volleyball conferences that partook in the fall season. So I definitely appreciate that, Mike. Once again, I definitely appreciate that. I know it was a lot of work, but I tip my hat to you for editing all of that. So, all right. So now let's jump back into segment number 2 of Set Point. So I have gone over the West Coast Conference, and I went through the bottom 5 teams of the conference. Now let's go over the top 5 teams of the West Coast Conference last year. So in at number 5, we had LMU. So LMU went 15-15 overall and 9-9 in conference play. And they also, I guess it's also safe to say, they went 6-3 in home games as well. So overall, LMU, or Loyola Marymount, as most people like to call them, wasn't a bad team, but they kind of weren't as good as they have been in the past. Like, in the past, LMU has been a decent team, and they've actually had their moments in terms of upsets. Like, I remember back, I think it was in 2016, I want to say. That it was either 2016 or 2000. It was before the Catherine Plummer era. I think it was 2016, LMU upset Stanford, and Stanford, I think, won the Pac-12 championship, and was actually one of the favorites to win the NCAA tournament. But unfortunately, LMU had other plans. And one of those players that was on LMU was Sarah Sponsel, who was at LMU until she transferred to UCLA just to focus on beach. And in case you're wondering about Sarah Sponsel, she is familiar because she plays on the AVP volleyball circuit. So yeah. That's kind of your Snapple fun fact. So here's the thing about Loyola this year, or Loyola Marymount this year. They lost quite a bit of seniors. One senior they lost in general to graduation was Savannah Slattery. She had a whopping 412 kills, and she had 226 digs. The 412 kills were actually the most on the team, and then the 226 digs were actually third most on the team behind Ella Boley and Bo Kulo. So losing a player like her also definitely makes a big impact. They also lost Bo Kulo to graduation as well, as she had 295 digs, which was the most on the team. And then they lost Tess Reed, the setter, who led the team in assists with 884, and then she also had 224 digs to boot. That was fourth most on the team. So, yeah. And then they also lost Emma Johnson, who had 125 kills. But they do return some talented players, such as Rose Booth, who had 242 kills from last year. And then they also returned Megan Rice, who had 193 kills from last year. I think last year was her first year at Loyola Marymount, considering she transferred from UC Santa Barbara. The reason I know who she is because she played in she played high school volleyball in Southern California at Redondo Union High School, and she was a freaking powerhouse, my dudes. Like, she was very talented, and I guess it wasn't working out for her at UC Santa Barbara, so she decided to go down the freeway, go down the freeway, go down Pacific Coast Highway, come back home to Loyola Marymount. So, yeah, that's cool and all. And then Jessie Pritchard is also a noteworthy name to bring up because she returns as well as the setter, and she's more than likely going to be the starting setter for Loyola Marymount, as she had 373 assists, and she is a redshirt senior setter. So it's good to see that she'll be able to step up, and other players that will be stepping up will be Emmeline Walters, who had 160 kills, and like I said, Megan Rice is another player that returns for them, but Loyola Marymount did get hit hard in terms of graduation, so it might take them a little while for them to maybe climb up the West Coast Conference ladder. I'm not entirely certain, but overall, LMU has a solid team, but they're not a top-tier team, so that's kind of their problem. So, sorry about that. So, now let's go into the fourth-place team from last year's West Coast Conference, and that was Santa Clara. So, I talked a little about Santa Clara. Santa Clara had lots of talent, and they were a very tall team, very tall, talented, and well-coached. And to be honest, I think their team didn't get a whole lot of love because, again, the West Coast Conference is not a Power 5 conference, which is disappointing. So not a whole lot of teams are going to be coming or going to the NCAA tournament from that conference. Like, it's disappointing, actually. So for Santa Clara, they have quite the stacked roster, and they do actually return quite a bit of players this year. They return Julia Sangiacomo, who had 411 kills from last year, and she would she had 77 blocks overall, and she was only she had those numbers, and she was only a freshman. I think she was like 6'5" if I'm not mistaken, and she like when I interviewed her after the game, I'm like, holy crud, you are tall. So yeah, I felt rather short when interviewing her. So you go, girl. But yeah, Julia Sangiacomo is a very talented player. Her height, she serves the ball quite well, actually. She had 39 service aces, which was second on the team. And then, like I said, those 411 kills were just straight up bananas. And she led the team in kills per set with 3.5, pretty much. So she's a very talented player. And the fact that she's now only a sophomore is quite scary. Another player that returns for the team is Allison Cantor, who actually was second on the team in kills. She had 337 kills, and she hit 236, which wasn't bad. And then she had 51 blocks, and then she had 301 digs, which actually led the team in digs. I'm surprised she led the team in digs, no, she was second in digs, behind someone else, which I'm going to be getting into in a little bit, So yeah, that's Allison Cantor's stats, noteworthy stats. So yeah, and then in terms of more kills, they lost to Taylor Odom to graduation. She had 249 kills, but she was a redshirt senior from last year, so there's that. They do also return Michelle Schaefer, a sophomore opposite. She is probably very pivotal in the Santa Clara offense, as, like I said, she is a setter and an opposite. So she sets the ball and she hits the ball. Basically, she's kind of like a Taysom Hill-like player. So anyway, Michelle Schaefer had 171 kills, 781 assists, and she had 50 service aces. Those 50 service aces led the team in that department. And she also had 304 digs, which led the team in that department as well. So she is an overall gadget-type player. So she is basically Taysom Hill, except not Taysom Hill, because Taysom Hill's a quarterback. Taysom Hill doesn't play volleyball. And, again, Taysom Hill doesn't played at BYU. He didn't play at Santa Clara. And pretty much. So that's pretty much that. And then, in terms of other players returning in terms of assists, Liliana Light had 454 assists, which is impressive. So Santa Clara does run a 6-2 offense with two setters, which is quite impressive, and I think that's going to be crucial. And Liliana Light also had 174 digs. And then I also got to mention that Julia Sangiacomo had 275 digs. So I'm surprised she wasn't named the West Coast Conference Freshman of the Year. But we'll see. But I'll get into who actually got the darn award. So there's that. And then Liliana Light had 17 service aces, which that's cool, I guess. And I think that's pretty much it. Alexa Dreyer graduated from last year. She was a senior middle blocker. And yeah, Gretchen Reiner, I guess, is a silly me. I said Michelle Schaefer led the team in digs. That is actually incorrect. Gretchen Reinhardt, I think I'm pronouncing her name right. Gretchen Reiner led the team in digs with 452 digs. That is quite the amount of digging that she did right there. I think she was actually their libero, but I think I remember that she was actually defensive specialist for Santa Clara in their game against Long Beach. So I don't know if Santa Clara was actually tinkering with something, like trying a new libero or whatnot, but either way, Gretchen Reiner is definitely a talented libero/defensive specialist. And then she also had 23 service aces, which was third on the team. This team only had 194 service aces, which I guess is pretty good, but still, it's solid. So I also do want to give a shout to Santa Clara for having a very good website that allowed me to print out their statistics, which had their grade levels from last year as well. Like most of the PDF stats that I print out do not show the grade level, so that's kind of disappointing. But it is what it is. But big shout out to Santa Clara. So, in closing on Santa Clara, last year Santa Clara. Actually, I'm blanking on their record. The stat sheet that I actually printed out doesn't show their record. Last year, Santa Clara went 10-8 in the West Coast Conference. I want to say that most of their losses came at the hands of the top three teams, and then Loyola Marymount. I'm just going to double... Well, actually, no, I can't check that. But Santa Clara actually went 21-12. Remember, one of those wins and losses came from the NIVC, the National Invitational Volleyball Championship, which is basically the NIT in terms of volleyball. So, overall, Santa Clara was actually one of three teams that registered 20-plus wins. The other two being San Diego and BYU. So, overall, this Santa Clara team does return a lot of talent. They return Cantor, and they also return San Giacomo, and then they return the two setters. Like, this team could actually do some damage. So, that's pretty much Santa Clara. Now, let's go to the third place team from the West Coast Conference, and that is actually Pepperdine. A favorite of mine, because, let me just tell you something. One of our past guests on Set Point, Steve Astor, is the assistant coach for Pepperdine. So we will get to see this team in action sooner rather than later, and we hope to see that. And we hope to see Steve Astor on the sidelines, and hopefully all is well with him, because he went from being a volunteer assistant coach at Washington all the way to coming back home and being a full-time assistant coach at Pepperdine. Okay, so here's the thing about Pepperdine, though. Last year they went 18-11 overall, and then their conference record was 14-4. But they didn't make the NCAA tournament. This was the third-place team from the West Coast Conference. This is a team that had a solid record, and a team that actually played other teams quite close. Like, I'm surprised they didn't get into the NCAA tournament. But then again, once again, being in a non-Power 5 conference really does hurt this team. So, overall, I kind of was surprised to not see this team in the NCAA tournament, but I kind of wasn't. Let's break down Pepperdine's schedule, actually. So, here's Pepperdine's schedule, and I was really annoyed to not see this team in the NCAA tournament, and I was also bummed to not see them in the NIVC. The NIVC is more so of an optional thing, but I would have liked to seen them in that as well, because they had quite a bit of seniors on their team, so unfortunately they didn't partake in the NIVC from last year. So, going over Pepperdine's schedule, they had a lot of 5-set losses. That was kind of what hurt them a lot. So, their first 5-set loss came in their season opener against Tulsa. I was kind of surprised they lost that, but at the same time, Tulsa has a knack for beating West Coast Conference teams. Hint, hint, when they beat Santa Clara in the NIVC. So then they played North Texas, which I believe is called the Mean Green. And the Mean Green beat Pepperdine in 5 sets. And this was actually in the North Texas Challenge. So the first day of the season, Pepperdine played 2 5-set matches and were on the wrong side of both of said matches, which is not fun. And then they beat Illinois State. Okay, that's pretty good. They also beat Cal Baptist, which is pretty good. And then they beat Fairfield. This was in their own tournament. This was in the Pepperdine tournament. And they, like I said, they beat Cal Baptist and they beat Fairfield. And then they lost to Texas A&M. But Texas A&M is a very good team. They're actually a pretty darn good team. And I want to say I think they were the 16th seed, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong, though, but who knows. Anyway, so now for the Pepperdine A6 Classic. Pepperdine lost to Utah in 4 sets, and then they lost to Cal Poly in 5 sets, which I think they probably could have beaten Cal Poly. And then they lost to Pitt, which was destroying everybody, but they actually lost to Pitt in 5 sets. So, and the thing about Pepperdine is that they were actually leading 2-1 in the match, and then Pitt came back to win the 4th set and force the 5th set, and then Pitt won the 5th set 16-14, which was disappointing for Pepperdine because I think that would have been funny to see Pitt lose to Pepperdine. So to close out the non-conference schedule, Pepperdine beat UC Irvine, which was to be expected. But then they lost another 5-set non-conference game, and they lost to UC Santa Barbara at UC Santa Barbara. And the worst part about that loss is that Pepperdine had a 2-0 lead and then decided to go into fetal position and proceed to lose to Santa Barbara. It's losses like that can cost you a spot in the NCAA tournament. I mean, Santa Barbara was good, but if Pepperdine flips the switch and actually beats Santa Barbara, they might actually get in. And then Santa Barbara might be the one on the outside looking in. Just some food for thought. Alright, so now let's get into Pepperdine's conference schedule from last year. So like I said, they had some good wins. They beat Santa Clara. They did lose a 5-set game to San Diego, which was so disappointing. The 5-set matches were so disappointing. They lost a 5-set match to San Diego, and they beat all the teams that they were supposed to beat, except for one, and that was St. Mary's. They lost to St. Mary's at St. Mary's in 4 sets. Again, you can't lose. It's games like that you cannot lose to, because St. Mary's was like 6-11 going into that game, and they weren't even on Pepperdine's level, and yet they beat him in 4 sets. Like, you can't do this, Pepperdine. Like, no. But surprisingly enough, Pepperdine actually, after they got beat by St. Mary's, I think it was 5 days after they got beat by St. Mary's, they pulled off probably the biggest upset of the West Coast Conference in beating San Diego in straight sets, which was very impressive. I'll give them a round of applause. And I actually do want to give a shout to Marcus Losgreat, who popped up in the chat room. I definitely appreciate you for tuning in. So yeah, Pepperdine beat San Diego in straight sets. I was more surprised than ever because that actually turned out to be the only loss for San Diego in conference play. Very impressive. Unfortunately for Pepperdine, they lost to BYU in straight sets, and then they actually went on this tear after they lost to BYU. They beat Gonzaga in 5, they swept Portland, they swept LMU, they swept St. Mary's, they beat Pacific, they swept Santa Clara, they beat San Francisco, and in their final game of the season, Pepperdine lost to BYU in 5. So here's the thing about BYU. If Pepperdine had beaten BYU, Pepperdine gets in that NCAA tournament with ease, with the greatest of ease, because BYU at the time was, I believe they were top 10. No, they were number 13, but still, Pepperdine would definitely have gotten in that NCAA tournament had they beaten BYU. The problem was for Pepperdine was that they fell behind early in the match. They dropped the first 2 sets, then they won the next 2 sets, and then in the 5th set, it got ugly. They lost 15-3. They only put up 3 points in the 5th set, which that's very tough to win a match when you're only putting up 3 points in that set. So, yeah. But the NCAA tournament didn't deem Pepperdine worthy enough of being in the NCAA tournament, and I guess Pepperdine declined a spot in the NIVC, so I guess that's to be expected. I guess some teams don't really want to play in the NIVC because that's kind of like an NIT, as I've been saying, but it's something to give your seniors a farewell send-off for, so I don't know. Okay, so that's pretty much Pepperdine. I'm going to try to power past BYU here. So BYU, I actually didn't really get to talk about Pepperdine a whole lot in terms of their roster, but still. BYU. Okay, BYU was very talented. They had a lot of great seniors on their team. One notable senior on their team was Mary Lake, who, according to BYU's Twitter account, Mary Lake is one of the greatest lakes in the USA. Yes, I'm not kidding. It was obviously a joke that they made, but they said Mary Lake is one of the greatest lakes in the USA. Or in the world, for that matter. But I don't remember the tweet off the top of my head, but I was like, really? Mary Lake is one of the greatest lakes in the world. It's over. No, I'm kidding. But BYU was very talented last year. So they were actually one of few teams to knock off Stanford. I think they were the one of 3 or 4 teams to knock off Stanford. And they beat them in 4 sets, which was very surprising. And they beat them at Stanford, which not a whole lot of teams can beat Stanford at Maples Pavilion and live to tell the tale. So that's quite impressive for Stanford, for BYU. The last team to beat, prior to last season, the last team to beat Stanford at Stanford was San Diego, which, coincidentally enough, they were actually in the same conference as BYU. Yay! So, in a nutshell, BYU had a pretty solid season. They did have that one loss to Marquette, which was completely unacceptable, and then their other loss came at the hands of Texas. And then in conference play, they lost twice to San Diego. They lost twice to San Diego, which was kind of disappointing, because I don't even remember the last time San Diego actually beat BYU twice in one season. Like, that's a rarity like theirs. Rarity right there. Either way, I will say this. They did pack the house in their first matchup between San Diego. They had 4,445 people at that game. I don't know if it was mainly San Diego fans, but I'm pretty sure it was mostly BYU fans. So, anyway, for BYU, they lost quite a bit of players to graduation. They lost their top 3 kill leaders. They lost McKenna Miller, Madeline Robinson, and Heather... Oh, I'm going to butcher her. Heather Nading? I'm not sure, but they lost those 3 kill leaders. McKenna Miller had 397 kills. Madeline Robinson had 279 kills. And then Heather Nading had 226 kills. And then their next kill leader had 195 kills, and that's Kennedy Eschenberg. So BYU is going to be a little different this year. And then they also lost Mary Lake to graduation, and she is the all-time dig leader at BYU. So that's some good stuff right there on Miss Lake's part. And no, Mary Lake is not one of the great lakes in the world. So let's get that straight right there. One player they do return that's noteworthy is Whitney Bower, the setter, who had 1,070 assists and 278 digs, which was good for second on the team, which is nice and all. Their third dig leader was Riley Lyman, who had 109 digs, and then their second dig leader had 170 digs, and that was Madeline Robinson. So, like I said, BYU lost quite a bit to graduation, but they do return some sort of talent. Like, I don't think BYU is going to go anywhere. I think BYU is they'll stay competitive. Like, I don't think they're not going to, like, they're not going to like deteriorate and whatnot. They did. I don't even think they lost too many seniors. They did lose noteworthy seniors. If I'm looking at their roster online, and they only lost 4 seniors. But those 4 seniors were staples. Those 4 were starters. So it's going to be tough for BYU to replace those 4 starters. So we'll see if BYU can take the top spot in the West Coast Conference. Now for the top team in the West Coast Conference from last year, San Diego. Okay, so San Diego was actually quite the wild card. San Diego actually started out losing their first 2 games. They lost to Hawaii in 5 sets, which was disappointing. And then they lost to Washington in 4 sets, which it wasn't as disappointing, but I thought that San Diego was better than that. And then they won their next 2 games against St. John's and Arkansas. Big deal. No one cares about that. And then they lost to Nebraska in 5 sets, which obviously Nebraska was... Well, actually, no. Nebraska was down that year. They had such a young team. I thought that was San Diego's best chance to knock them off. Unfortunately, they couldn't, and they lost in 5 sets at the Jenny Craig Pavilion. And then also, San Diego lost to UC Santa Barbara in 4 sets last year. But Santa Barbara was talented. They were stacked. So, yeah. A few noteworthy wins that San Diego did have was that they beat USC in 5 sets, which that's pretty cool, I guess. Unfortunately, it's not cool for some of us USC fans because we don't like seeing USC lose. And then also another noteworthy win that they had was against Long Beach State, but no one cares about that other than me. Although Long Beach did make it close in the 3rd set, but it just wasn't meant to be in terms of Long Beach State winning. Anyway, now let's look at the conference schedule from last year in terms of San Diego. So they did have some 5-set matches. They obviously had the 2 against BYU. They went 5 with Pepperdine and won that one, beating Pepperdine at the Jenny Craig Pavilion. They did have that 1 loss to Pepperdine, which was kind of surprising, but not really. I think the problem with San Diego was that was kind of their loss to Pepperdine came after they beat BYU the first time, which that's kind of expected considering BYU, after you come off of an emotional big win like that, emotions are high and you're pretty much thinking that you're like on top, and then you see another team that's pretty much a trap game. That entire week was a trap game for San Diego as well, because after BYU and after Pepperdine, they played Loyola Marymount, which that's basically the Pacific Coast Highway matchup right there, because Pepperdine and LMU are both on like the 405 and whatnot. I'll stop. But that's kind of what that's what Pepperdine and LMU call their little rivalry. I think it's called the Clash of Pacific Coast Highway, or the Freeway matchup. I don't remember, but either way, BYU and San Diego have a rivalry rekindled. So as for San Diego's players, they do return quite a bit of players. They return Thana Fayad, who is a graduate player. She graduated last year from San Diego, and she is back with the team. And they also returned Katie Lukes, who is a junior outside hitter. Fayad is a outside hitter as well. Both players, surprisingly, had 298 kills. And then they did lose Megan Jacobson to graduation, but they also returned Grace Froling to their team. She was the West Coast Conference's freshman of the year, and I think she was also the regional freshman of the year as well, if I'm not mistaken. And Grace Froling was friggin' amazing. She had 264 kills, and then surprisingly they didn't use her a whole lot for assists, even though they have her listed as a setter and an opposite. Like, the thing about Grace Froling is that she actually played setter back in her high school days at Marymount High School, an all-girls school in Los Angeles. So I'm surprised they don't use Grace Froling for setting as well as for hitting as well. Like, make her a multi-tool player. Make her like a Swiss Army knife and whatnot. So, yeah. So, other notable players that San Diego returns is Annie Benbow, who led the team in digs with 397. She is a junior libero, so I think she's going to do some wonders for the Toreros. Unfortunately, they lost Anna Newsom, their setter, to graduation. She led the team in assists and service aces, registering 1,072 assists, and she registered 32 service aces, so unfortunately, they don't have her. But they do also have Roxy Wilbin and Hannah Patrick. Patrick didn't see a whole lot of play last year, but they do have Roxy Wilbin, who they return as well. So that's going to be fun times for the Toreros. So I think this San Diego team, it's a little early for me to say this, but I think this San Diego team can win the West Coast Conference again. I think the Toreros return quite a good number of players from last year, and I think they're on track, and I think they just have the motivation and the talent to actually win the West Coast Conference again. Do I think it's going to happen? Of course, it's not. It remains to be seen, but I think this team has quite the potential, and I think this team is well on their way. We actually have only a few minutes left. I don't know if the other show's going to go on, but I'm just going to wrap up here with San Diego's schedule. San Diego's schedule is kind of a cakewalk to start. They have back-to-back games at Gonzaga on January 26th and 27th. Then they play Portland the week after, St. Mary's the week after. Then their schedule starts to pick up when they play at Santa Clara. I didn't talk about the conference format for the West Coast Conference. It's basically like the Big 12 conference format from this fall. It's basically back-to-back games. It's basically a series of games. It's a 2-game series the same week, and then also it'll be at one remote location. The only exception with that is when San Diego plays BYU, which is quite surprising. So, here's the thing about San Diego and BYU. The two teams face each other on March 19th at San Diego, and then the day after, March 20th, the two teams fly back to Utah to play each other at BYU in Provo. So, that's quite the interesting thing. And did I tell you that BYU and Pepperdine are the last two games for USD or San Diego or the Toreros? I guess I didn't tell you all that, but I will say this: San Diego does look promising. Pepperdine also looks promising with the amount of talent that they return, such as Shannon Scully. Yeah, I didn't talk about Pepperdine's players, but they returned Shannon Scully, Madison Shields, their libero, Kaylee Hames, their outside hitter, Isabel Zelaya, their setter opposite, and they also have some good up-and-coming freshmen such as Emma Ammerman and Meg Brown, who should make an impact for that team. They will have to do a lot to replace Hannah Froling and Tara Wiley, but they do have Rachel Aherns as well at the outside hitter / opposite position. So, honestly, Pepperdine can make the NCAA tournament. Like I said, the problem with the NCAA tournament this year is that this year there's only 32 at-large teams as opposed to 46. Because remember, the tournament this year has been trimmed down to 48 teams. 16 automatic qualifiers, and then 32 at-large teams. And remember, West Coast Conference is not a Power 5 school, so unfortunately, they're not going to get a whole lot of love when it comes to the NCAA tournament in terms of at-large spots. But I will also say this: I really hope they can at least take 3 teams. I hate to say this, but one talented team from the West Coast Conference is going to be left out of the NCAA tournament, which I find sad. But it is what it is. But that's going to do it for tonight's episode of Set Point. Thank you all for tuning in to this show. And without any further delay, it's time to drop the beat, because I am about to dip like a banana in chocolate. You feel me? Thank you all for tuning in to tonight's episode of Set Point. Thank you to Marcus, who popped in the chat room. I definitely appreciate you hearing me talk about Pepperdine and whatnot. Thank you all that's listening on the replay. Thank you all for listening live. I will see you all Friday for the SoCal Supreme Sports Show. Have a great night, everybody. Peace and blessings.